Welcome back for a new collections video, this time looking at my favorite console of all time, the Sega Dreamcast. First is currently the only loose game I have for the Dreamcast, and that is the classic boat racing game, Hydro Thunder. And the music of choice today I chose from the original Soul Calibur. But with that said, let's get on with it. But that is the only loose game. Next up, we are going to look at my Japanese first. Have a couple sealed Japanese games. First up is considered a classic of soccer games, which is actually really cool, and you can get some of these games actually very affordable and very cheap. Also, a interesting, Japanese baseball game as well. And yeah, it even has stuff you can do with the VMU unit, which is kind of cool. Next up, Capcom vs. SNK, the original, which is a true all-time classic in my personal opinion. Love this game and always will. Also, then you have the improved version, which is called Capcom vs. SNK Pro, which includes the two new additional characters as you see on the front, Dan Hibiki and Joe. But with that said, I do appreciate it. I think it's kind of cool. Seeing Dan actually get to be on the cover art is pretty cool. Next up is Capcom vs. SNK 2, which actually I have two copies of. One regular, and then this one is factory sealed. But with that said, I absolutely love this cover art. This is just awesome. Of course, this was only released for the Dreamcast in Japan only, never in the West. Which kind of sucks, in my opinion. Next up, we have an interesting RPG game. Definitely the cover art is different and unique. Basically, it's like a strategy RPG. And it gives off definitely like an SNK art style on the cover art, in my opinion. Also, talk about classics when it comes to Capcom, can't look any farther than Project Justice, the sequel to, of course, the beloved cult classic Rival Schools. And this is arguably, in my opinion, some of the best cover art of any video game ever. Also, of course, the classic original Soul Calibur, which you can't go wrong with this game, as it's one of the greatest fighting games, my personal favorite weapon-based fighting game of all time, and my favorite fighting game on the Dreamcast. Also, Street Fighter 3 Double Impact, which includes New Generation and Second Impact, which is cool. And I dig the art style on the cover art between Alex and Ryu. Also, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. And again, actually, another factory sealed copy game. Like I admit, on a lot of fighting games, I think the Japanese actually got definitely the cooler artwork covers, in my opinion. And I like how, like, Chun is front and center of the cover art. Also, not quite as cool, definitely a bit interesting, I guess you could say, is Street Fighter 03, or better well known as Alpha 3. Also, sadly, with this one, I only have the cover art. I don't have the rest, which sucks. But yeah, this is, of course, my personal favorite King of Fighters game of all time, and I feel criminally underrated. King of Fighters 2000. And I actually do like the cover art, and probably one of my favorite female characters in the franchise. Last of the Japanese is Virtua Fighter 3, which, of course, all-time classic. Always have and always will. Love Dreamcast no matter what. Next up, quickly show you a couple things before I get to radio games that you'll see in a future edition of Pickups. This, which is actually a cool, like, custom ROM that was done, and the person actually goes out of the way to try and make, like, a official style, like, case and everything for the original classic Half-Life, which actually only got a traditional physical release on the PS2. But there was this special fan-made ROM hack of Half-Life for the Dreamcast, which is cool. And when I first learned about this, I was like, I had to get myself a copy of this custom ROM, which is actually just in general really cool. I like how they actually went out of their way to try and make it look official. Also, other one is, of course, Rayman 2, The Great Escape. Arguably the greatest of the Rayman series, at least in my personal opinion anyways. But I played this years ago. It is definitely nice to have a chance to replay it again, though I played the inferior PS1 version before. So it is going to be good to have the definitive version. Next, we have a really cool little thing called Dreamcast, which allowed you to play PS1 games on the Dreamcast, and actually had overall better quality, actually improved the graphics and everything. In total, there will be a few of these actually done, Dreamcast. They would do one for Metal Gear Solid, one for Gran Turismo 2. Of course, you have here the fighting game one, obviously, and that is to play Tekken 3 on the Dreamcast. As you see, it shows the graphics comparison with Heihachi. And this is genuinely cool. Now, if you're curious about this, on average, these go for about $15 on eBay if you're at all interested. But Dreamcast is really cool in my opinion. Next up, we have a really cool compilation collection. Not necessarily the greatest versions, ROMs, but still a great collection of a lot of classics in my opinion. As you see here, you get 12 classics. You get Sonic 1, Golden Axe, Shining Force, Streets of Rage 2, Wrestle War, Columns, Phantasy Star 2, Vector Man, Altered Beast, Sega Swirl, which is one of my personal favorite things, Virtual Cop 2, Revenge of Shinobi, all-time classics Sega games. Also, the 3D Echo the Dolphin, Defender of the Future, which is a relatively very funny and out there 3D platformer, but I think it's cool and it's definitely unique for the time. And it still remains a Dreamcast exclusive to this day. Also, if you like sports games, you have the Sega Sports NFL 2K series. There, of course, you see on the cover art, funny enough, of all of them, is featured Randy Moss, which was big at the time with the Minnesota Vikings, along with Culpepper. And I know because also Randy Moss went to my hometown college, Marshall University. But anyways, with that said, next up, we also have the classic Sonic Adventure. Arguably one of the greatest Sonic games ever made, in my opinion. Also, of course, the American version of Capcom vs. SNK 2. Not as cool cover art, unfortunately, as the Japanese, but that's expected many a time when it comes to these games. Next up, sadly just custom cover art, as at the time I only got this game originally loose, so I just picked up a relatively affordable custom case and everything. But this is a fascinating, unique, relatively rare game called Cannon Spike, obviously, which features Charlie Nash, but also has unlockable characters like Mega Man and Cammy and others. It's definitely a very interesting game. It's an interesting style, like Unreal shooter type of game. Also, of classics, can't forget Crazy Taxi, which of course is an all-time Dreamcast classic, and the fact the entire soundtrack was done by The Offspring, as this was my introduction to The Offspring, was Crazy Taxi, which is something I still appreciate to this day. Also, the classic Dead or Alive 2. Still a great one, and even if it's not overcomplicated, I actually do like the simplicity of the cover art, personally, of Dead or Alive 2. Always have been a big fan. This was the game that got me into the DOA series in general. And with the weird Birdman villain. Also, of course, can't forget the cult classic Jet Grind Radio. Better well known as Jet Set Radio, but still, Jet Grind Radio is a true classic and always will be, in my opinion. And definitely one heck of a soundtrack as well. Of course, with the cover art obviously revolving around Beat. Next up, we have, of course, Marvel vs. Capcom, the original classic. Which, actually, this cover art I actually do genuinely like quite a bit. I think if American done cover art, this is probably one of the best, in my opinion. Of course, they're seeing like some of the stuff like Mega Man going up against Hulk, War Machine, Zangief. And of course, can't forget Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is arguably still to this day very beloved for many a good reason. And definitely has become a very sought after game in recent years. An interesting cover art. Personally, I find this cover art interesting compared to the Xbox, though I actually think at the end of the day I may like the Xbox cover just a little bit more. But there, of course, on the cover, Psylocke with Guile. Then next, another custom cover art case I got a while back for the American version copy of mine of Project Justice, which is insanely hard to find nowadays and insanely overpriced. Now, one of the more interesting fighting games from this era is, in my opinion, Psychic Force 2012. When this game came out, I believe it came out around like 1999 originally. But now we're 10 years past the timeline of this game. What's kind of interesting how you maneuver around in the game makes it very unique and different to many other fighting games of this time period. definitely of 3D fighters. It's definitely very different, that's for sure. Next is, of course, very beloved game for many reasons. Of course, that being the original classic Shenmue, which I genuinely do love the cover art of this game. As one thing, I think all the Shenmue games have had pretty good cover art. Next up, we have, of course, the very beloved, considered to be the Final Fantasy VII of the Dreamcast, and of course that is Skies of Arcadia, which has become definitely quite a collector's item over the years, as on average now, this game is going for like $150 or so, which is kind of crazy in my opinion. Still a great game, and it's very different from many JRPGs of the time, given you're a sky pirate, battling other sky pirates. As you see, yeah, you could have up to like 22 crew members, switch back and forth between characters and stuff, and that is one of the things that I think helps Skies Arcadia remain very unique to this day of RPGs. Also, a somewhat overlooked game on the Dreamcast in my opinion, Slave Zero, where you just play with a giant robot, which strangely enough, face reminds me quite a bit of actually Spawn. Basically, it's just a mech game, though, at the end of the day. And yeah, it has up to a four-person multiplayer, which is kind of cool. Also, of course, the American all-time classic Soul Calibur, which will never probably be replaced as my personal favorite of the franchise. Call it blind nostalgia or whatever, but that's just how I feel. Also, a somewhat interesting Star Wars game with Star Wars Episode 1 Jedi Power Battles. We have Mace Windu on the front. And by the way, if you look at the cover art, it shows Mace Windu with a blue lightsaber and not a purple saber, which is interesting. Though there is actually a long story behind that. Also, next you have, of course, Street Fighter Double Impact. Which, of course, this is how I would play New Generation throughout the years, as it remains my personal favorite of the Street Fighter 3 games. And when you talk about Street Fighter 3, you can't go any farther without talking about, of course, Third Strike, with the over image of Gil just standing there. Next, we have, of course, King of Fighters Evolution, which is King of Fighters 99, just with multiple improvements. And I believe this is like the only console that got this version of the game. Also, of other RPGs, there weren't a lot of JRPGs really on the Dreamcast, but there were some really good ones. Time Stalkers is another one that I feel, though, doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. Also, of course, another game I personally really love, Vigilante 8: The Second Offense, which is far superior to the first game. In my opinion, I actually like more than pretty much all the Twisted Metal games. Just the different things you could do in the game is just awesome. And the last few. Next up we have of survival horror classics exclusively to this day to the Dreamcast, and that is the Activision-developed survival horror game called Blue Stinger, which is a cult classic horror game that I feel more people should actually try, but because of it being a Dreamcast exclusive, means very few people are probably ever going to play this game except for collectors of the Dreamcast. Though you can get this game relatively affordable compared to many other games on the console. Also, can't forget the all-time classic Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, done by IDOS Interactive. This is a game that I will continue to love probably pretty much forever. Second to last, well, actually one other, but still, definitely an all-time classic. You have, though somewhat of a guilty pleasure of mine, Mortal Kombat Gold, which I think more people should actually give this game a chance. It's definitely the best way to play MK4, with improved additional characters and everything. Nightmare Creatures 2, not as beloved as the first Nightmare Creatures, but hey, if you're a Rob Zombie fan, you'll probably enjoy the soundtrack to the game, at the very least. I still like the game for what it is, though, but last but not least, Resident Evil Code Veronica, which remains one of my personal favorite horror games to this very day. It is a true all-time classic in my opinion, and always will be. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. Stay safe out there, and have a good 2023. I'll see y'all next time.